The crack of a pistol shot echoed through the night as Penelope Valentine stumbled through the rain-soaked wilderness. Her younger siblings huddled against her like frightened birds. Blood trickled down her temple where the bullet had grazed her, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the terror of what lay behind them, and what might await them ahead in the unforgiving Montana territory of 1878. "Keep moving," Penelope whispered to 12-year-old Emma and 8-year-old Thomas, whose small fingers clutched her sodden skirts. "We can't stop, not yet." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating their desperate faces for a moment before plunging them back into darkness. The rain had been a blessing, washing away their tracks as they fled the Valentine homestead, a place that had once been filled with love before their mother's death 3 years ago, and their father's subsequent descent into alcohol-fueled violence. The tipping point had come that very evening when Thaddeus Valentine, in a drunken rage, had taken his pistol from the mantel and fired it at Penelope when she'd stepped between him and Emma. The bullet's kiss against her temple had sobered him momentarily, just long enough for Penelope to grab her siblings and flee into the storm while their father collapsed in a drunken stupor. "Penny," Thomas whimpered, his small frame shivering beneath the oversized coat she'd grabbed on their way out. "I'm scared." "I know, little one," she soothed, though her own heart hammered with fear. At 22, Penelope had been managing their household since their mother's passing, enduring their father's escalating cruelty to protect her siblings. But tonight had crossed a line from which there was no return. "Just a bit further. We'll find somewhere safe." They trudged through mud and undergrowth, the storm growing more violent with each passing minute. Emma stumbled, nearly falling, and Penelope caught her, wincing at the pain in her own ribs where her father had struck her earlier. "There." Emma pointed ahead where a faint light glimmered through the trees. A lantern. Hope and fear warred within Penelope. A light meant shelter, but also people who might send them back to their father, or worse, separate them. Yet with the temperature dropping and the children soaked to the bone, they had little choice. As they approached, the silhouette of a barn emerged from the gloom, its weathered boards offering the promise of dry sanctuary. Beside it stood a modest farmhouse, lamp light spilling from a single window. "We'll just rest in the barn," Penelope decided, leading her siblings toward the structure. "Just until the storm passes." The barn door was mercifully unlatched. They slipped inside, the sudden absence of rain almost deafening in its contrast. The warm smell of hay and animals enveloped them, and Penelope nearly wept with relief. "Up in the loft," she whispered, helping Thomas and Emma climb the ladder. "We'll be warmer there and hidden if anyone comes." They nestled into the hay, huddling together for warmth. Penelope stripped off her siblings' wet outer garments, spreading them nearby to dry. She worked methodically despite her trembling hands, an old practice from years of managing crisis after crisis. "Will Papa find us?" Emma asked, her voice small in the darkness. "No," Penelope promised, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Their father was a skilled hunter, and while the rain might hide their trail tonight, what of tomorrow? "We're safe now. Try to sleep." The children, exhausted by fear and flight, quickly succumbed to slumber. Penelope remained vigilant, listening to every creak and rustle of the unfamiliar barn. The warmth of the hay and the rhythmic breathing of her siblings slowly lulled her into an uneasy doze. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when the sound of the barn door opening jolted her awake. Instinctively, she covered Emma's and Thomas's mouths with her hands, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might give them away. Heavy boots crossed the barn floor, accompanied by the soft glow of a lantern. Through the gaps in the loft floor, Penelope could see a tall figure moving below, checking on the animals. She held her breath as the light paused directly beneath their hiding place. "I know you're up there." The voice was deep, calm, carrying no immediate threat. Penelope remained frozen, clutching her siblings who had awakened at the sound. "I'm not going to hurt you," the voice continued. "But you're dripping water through my hayloft and my horse is spooked something fierce." Still, she didn't respond, weighing their chances if they had to flee again. The barn door was their only exit, and the stranger stood between them and freedom. A sigh echoed through the barn. "Look, it's colder than a banker's heart out there, and that storm's not letting up till morning. I've got hot stew on the stove and a fire going. No questions asked." The man set his lantern down and moved toward the door. "I'll leave this here. Come down if you want or stay up there. Your choice." The barn door closed behind him, and Penelope counted to 100 before daring to move. She peered down at the lantern left behind, a peace offering, perhaps, or a trap. "I'm hungry," Thomas whispered, breaking the silence. "And cold." Emma nodded in agreement, her teeth chattering despite their shared warmth. Penelope touched her temple where the blood had dried. Her father's bullet could have killed her tonight. What kind of life awaited them if they ran without help? Without food, without money? "Stay here," she finally decided. "I'll go see if it's safe." "No," Emma clutched at her arm. "Don't leave us." "I'll be right back," Penelope promised. "If anything happens, you hide deeper in the hay and don't come out until morning. Then run toward town. Find Sheriff Miller, he was always kind to Mother." She descended the ladder cautiously, each rung creaking beneath her weight. At the bottom, she picked up the lantern and approached the barn door, cracking it open just enough to peer outside. The farmhouse stood about 50 yards away, warm light spilling from its windows. No movement was visible inside. Taking a deep breath, Penelope stepped out into the rain, which had lessened to a steady drizzle, and made her way toward the house. The porch steps groaned beneath her feet as she approached the door. Before she could knock, it swung open, revealing the barn's owner. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with a weathered face that spoke of long days under the sun. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and keen blue eyes assessed her without judgment. He wore no gun that she could see, just simple working clothes and an expression of patient concern. "You're hurt," he said, nodding toward her temple. Penelope's hand flew to the wound instinctively. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in." "Food first, then I've got some salve for that cut." She hesitated, still wary. "There are children in your barn, my brother and sister." Something flickered across his face, surprise, then understanding. "Bring them in. Nobody should be out in this weather, especially not little ones." "Why would you help us? You don't know us." The man's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Samuel Owens," he introduced himself. "Now we're not strangers. The stew's getting cold." Penelope studied him for another long moment before making her decision. "I'll get my siblings." Minutes later, the 3 Valentine siblings sat at Samuel Owens's table, steam rising from bowls of rabbit stew placed before them. Thomas and Emma ate ravenously, while Penelope merely picked at her food, her gaze constantly moving between her siblings and their host. Samuel busied himself gathering medical supplies, giving them space to eat. When he returned to the table, he set down a small tin of salve, clean cloths, and a bottle of whiskey. "This will sting," he warned, soaking a cloth in the alcohol, "but that cut needs cleaning." Penelope flinched as the whiskey touched her wound, but remained silent. Samuel worked with surprising gentleness, his calloused fingers deftly applying the salve after cleaning the graze. "Bullet?" he asked quietly, ensuring the children couldn't hear. She met his eyes, finding no judgment there, only concern. Slowly, she nodded. "Your husband, father," she corrected, her voice barely audible. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more as he finished tending to her wound. Only when he had put away his supplies did he speak again. "You can take the bedroom. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "We couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Samuel said firmly. "The little ones are about to fall asleep in their stew." Indeed, Thomas's head was nodding, his spoon forgotten in his bowl. Emma wasn't faring much better, exhaustion evident in her drooping shoulders. "Just for tonight," Penelope conceded. "We'll be gone in the morning." Samuel regarded her thoughtfully. "And go where?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Penelope helped her siblings prepare for bed. Samuel's bedroom was sparsely furnished but clean, with a bed large enough for the three of them. As she tucked Emma and Thomas beneath the quilt, their eyes already closed in slumber, Penelope wondered the same thing herself. Where would they go? She returned to the main room where Samuel sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He glanced up as she approached. "They asleep." "Almost before their heads touch the pillow," she confirmed, lowering herself onto a chair across from him. "Thank you, Mr. Owens." "Your kindness won't be forgotten, Samuel," he corrected. Or Sam. Never was one for formalities. A silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft scrape of his knife against wood. "I'm Penelope Valentine," she finally offered. "Emma is 12 and Thomas is 8. Samuel nodded, continuing his carving. "Valentine. You from the Valentine place out past Whitefish Creek," Penelope stiffened. "Yes. Long way to come on foot in this weather." His tone remained conversational, not pressing. "We had little choice." Samuel set down his whittling and looked at her directly. "Miss Valentine, I'm not in the business of sending folks back to places they've fled, especially not children. Whatever brought you to my barn tonight, you're welcome to stay until you sort things out." Relief washed over her, so profound that tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them away quickly. "We won't impose for long. I have some savings, not much, but enough to get us to my aunt in Boulder, perhaps." "No rush," Samuel said, standing and stretching. "I could use some help around the place, truth be told. Been meaning to hire someone, but good help's hard to find. If you're willing to earn your keep while you decide your next move, there's room enough." Penelope regarded him suspiciously. "Why would you offer such a thing to strangers?" Samuel's expression grew distant, as if looking into a past only he could see. "Let's just say I know something about running from trouble." He shook off the memory visibly. "Get some rest, Miss Valentine. Morning comes early on a ranch." As he turned to make up his bed by the fire, Penelope found herself studying this unexpected savior. There was something solid about Samuel Owens, something trustworthy in his straightforward manner. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had found a safe harbor in their storm. "Samuel," she said softly as she rose to return to the bedroom. "Thank you." He nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without ceremony. "They stay safe here," he promised. "You have my word on that." It was a simple vow, spoken without flourish. But as Penelope slipped into bed beside her sleeping siblings, those words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. For the first time since their mother's passing, she allowed herself to fully relax, surrendering to the exhaustion that claimed her within moments. Outside, the storm gradually subsided, giving way to the gentle rhythm of raindrops on the roof, nature's lullaby for three weary souls who had found sanctuary in a stranger's kindness. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the bedroom's single window. For a moment upon waking, Penelope was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up abruptly, checking on her siblings who still slumbered peacefully beside her. The smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted through the closed door, prompting her stomach to rumble. She quickly tidied herself as best she could with the limited resources available, smoothing her wrinkled dress and attempting to tame her tangled auburn hair with her fingers. Thomas stirred first, his eyes widening as he took in the strange room. "Penny, where are we? Remember last night, the kind man who let us stay in his house," she explained gently. "We're safe here." Emma awoke next, immediately more practical than her younger brother. "I'm starving." Penelope smiled despite their circumstances. "I think breakfast is waiting for us." When they emerged from the bedroom, they found Samuel at his cook stove, turning bacon in a cast iron skillet. He glanced over his shoulder at their entrance. "Thought you might sleep till noon," he remarked, though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. "Hope you're hungry." Thomas, suddenly shy in the daylight, moved behind Penelope, peering around her skirts at their host. Emma, however, approached the stove with curious interest. "I know how to cook," she offered. "Penny taught me." Samuel nodded seriously. "Good skill to have. Maybe you can show me a thing or two later. For now, table's set. Help yourselves to coffee, Miss Valentine. There's milk for the young ones." Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair: bacon, biscuits, and preserves that Samuel mentioned came from his neighbor, Mrs. Thornton, who makes the best peach preserves this side of the Mississippi. As they ate, Penelope observed their surroundings more carefully than she had been able to the night before. Samuel's home was modest but well-maintained. Though lacking feminine touches, it was clean and orderly, suggesting a man who took pride in his possessions. "Your ranch," Penelope began, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen. "You manage it alone," Samuel swallowed before answering. "Hire hands during busy seasons. Rest of the time it's just me." "Not a big spread: 30 head of cattle, some chickens, 2 horses, and that ornery mule you might have noticed in the barn." "What's the mule's name?" Thomas asked, finding his voice for the first time. "Congress," Samuel replied with a straight face. "Because he's stubborn and won't do a lick of work without complaining." Thomas giggled, and even Emma cracked a smile. "My pa has," Thomas began, then stopped abruptly, his face falling as he remembered their situation. An uncomfortable silence descended until Samuel cleared his throat. "After breakfast, I need to mend that fence in the north pasture. Could use a helper or two if you're offering." "We would be happy to help," Penelope said quickly, grateful for his tactful change of subject. "It's the least we can do." "The children can gather eggs while we work," Samuel suggested, "if they know how." "We do," Emma said proudly. "We had chickens before." Samuel nodded, not pressing for details. "Good, we'll all keep busy then." The morning passed in productive labor. Samuel and Penelope worked side by side, mending the fence that had been damaged in the storm. Though her hands were not as calloused as his, Penelope was no stranger to hard work, a fact that clearly impressed Samuel, though he said little. They worked mostly in companionable silence, with Samuel occasionally offering instruction or commenting on the weather. It wasn't until midday, when they paused to drink from Samuel's canteen, that he broached the subject of their future. "Town's 7 miles south," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Sheriff Dawson's a fair man if you're thinking of reporting." "Whatever happened?" Penelope stiffened. "My father has friends in town, drinking friends." Samuel studied her for a moment, seeming to weigh her words. "And your mother, consumption. 3 years ago." The familiar grief clutched at her heart, though time had dulled its sharpest edges. "She made me promise to keep us together, no matter what." "Seems to me you're keeping that promise just fine," Samuel observed, "though it can't have been easy." Penelope's hands twisted in her skirt as memories surfaced: her father's gradual transformation from grieving widower to violent drunk, The increasing burden of managing the household and protecting her siblings, the constant fear that had become their daily companion. He wasn't always. She began, then stopped, unsure why she felt compelled to defend a man who had nearly killed her. After Mother died, something broke in him. The drinking got worse and his temper. She unconsciously touched the healing graze on her temple. Last night was the first time he used his gun, but I feared it wouldn't be the last. Samuel's expression darkened. No man with any claim to honor raises his hand to his children, let alone pulls a trigger. His voice was low but carried an undercurrent of conviction that suggested personal experience with such matters. "What will happen now?" Penelope asked, voicing her deepest fear. "If he comes looking for us," Samuel straightened, his jaw set with determination, "he won't find you here. And if by some chance he does, he'll have to go through me first." He picked up his hammer and returned to the fence post they'd been securing. "Besides, folks round here mind their own business. As far as anyone needs to know, your distant cousins come to help after my accident." "What accident?" Penelope asked, confused. Samuel's mouth curved into a wry smile. "The one I'll invent if anybody asks too many questions." A laugh escaped her, the first genuine laugh in longer than she could remember, and the sound of it seemed to please Samuel, whose own smile deepened in response. They returned to the farmhouse at midday to find Emma and Thomas had not only collected eggs, but had also, under Mrs. Thornton's supervision, prepared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. The elderly neighbor had apparently arrived with more preserves just after they'd left for the pasture. "Lovely children," Mrs. Thornton pronounced to Samuel. "Your cousins have been raised proper, unlike those hellions of the Johnson family." She turned to Penelope, her keen eyes missing nothing about Penelope's ill-fitting clothes and healing wound. "You're welcome to come by tomorrow, dear. I have some dresses my daughter left behind that might suit you. Can't have you working in that Sunday best." Penelope stammered her thanks, amazed at how easily the older woman accepted their hastily concocted story. After Mrs. Thornton departed, Samuel explained, "Her husband died in the war. She lives alone about a mile east, checks on me regular, brings preserves, and generally makes sure I haven't died of my own cooking." "She seems kind," Penelope observed. "Salt of the earth," Samuel agreed, "and discreet, which is rarer than kindness in these parts." The afternoon brought more chores: water to be hauled, animals to be fed, a chicken coop to be repaired. By sunset, Penelope's muscles ached pleasantly from the unaccustomed labor, different from the household work she was used to. Thomas had taken a shine to the ornery mule, Congress, who showed surprising patience with the boy's attentions. Emma had proven herself remarkably capable around the kitchen, preparing a simple but satisfying supper under Penelope's guidance. As night fell, Samuel lit the lamps and settled in his chair by the fire, a ledger book open on his lap. Penelope sat nearby, mending one of Thomas's shirts that had torn during their flight, while the children played a quiet game of checkers on the floor. "We can't stay here indefinitely," Penelope said softly, ensuring her siblings wouldn't hear. "My father, when he sobers up, he'll come looking." Samuel didn't look up from his figures. "You mentioned an aunt in Boulder, my mother's sister. I haven't seen her since Mother's funeral, but she wrote once offering to take us in if things ever." She left the sentence unfinished. "That's a considerable journey. Would take money for stage fare, supplies." Samuel made a notation in his ledger. "Cattle drives coming up next month. Good pay for a few weeks' hard work. I could advance you wages for helping around here until then." Penelope's hands stilled in her mending. "You would do that for us?" Now Samuel did look up, his blue eyes serious in the lamplight. "Miss Valentine, I meant what I said about them staying safe." If Boulder's where that happens, then Boulder it is. A lump formed in Penelope's throat at his matter-of-fact kindness. Thank you. He nodded once, returning to his figures. Though I'll miss having decent meals if Emma leaves, that stew tonight was better than anything I've managed in years. The compliment brought a pleased flush to Emma's cheeks as she overheard. I could teach you before we go, she offered. Much obliged, Miss Emma, Samuel replied solemnly, making the girl giggle at the formal address. Later, after the children had been tucked into bed, Penelope returned to the main room to find Samuel standing on the porch, watching the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the night's chill. Will you tell me something? She asked after a comfortable silence, if I can. You said you know about running from trouble. What did you mean? Samuel was quiet for so long that Penelope thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if reaching back through years. My father was much like yours, I suspect, quick with his fists, quicker with his belt. My mother endured it until I was 14, then she took me and fled to her brother's ranch in Wyoming. He paused, his profile sharp against the night sky. My father found us 3 months later. My uncle tried to intervene. What happened? Penelope asked softly when he didn't continue. My father killed him, shot him right there in the yard. Samuel's hands tightened on the porch railing. I picked up my uncle's rifle and made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else ever again. Penelope's breath caught in her throat. You killed your own father. I protected what family I had left, Samuel corrected, his voice free of regret. Was cleared of any wrongdoing self-defense, the judge called it, but my mother never recovered from the shock of it all, died within the year. I'm so sorry, Penelope whispered, understanding now the source of his immediate empathy for their situation. Samuel turned to her, his expression softening in the moonlight. It was a long time ago, but it taught me something important. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do. And sometimes, the people you find along the way become more important than those you left behind. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was proper, and Penelope felt a curious warmth spreading through her chest despite the cool night air. She broke the gaze first, looking back toward the stars. The children are fond of you already, she observed. Especially Thomas. Good kids, Samuel replied. Smart, too. Emma has quite a head for figures. I saw her counting the egg money without a mistake, and Thomas has a way with animals. Congress hasn't let anyone pet him like that since I've owned him. Pride swelled in Penelope's heart. Despite everything, her siblings had retained their sweet natures and bright minds. They deserve better than what they've had. And they'll get it, Samuel assured her, whether here or in Boulder. The implication that they might stay hung between them, unaddressed but acknowledged. Penelope found herself surprisingly reluctant to dismiss the possibility outright. This day on Samuel's ranch had been more peaceful than any in recent memory, despite the physical labor and uncertainty of their situation. We should turn in, Samuel said finally. Another early morning tomorrow. Penelope nodded, but lingered a moment longer on the porch after he'd gone inside, breathing in the clean night air and allowing herself to contemplate, just briefly, what life might be like if they remained here safe, respected, perhaps even happy. It was a dangerous thought, she knew. One day of kindness didn't erase a lifetime of experience that taught her men couldn't be trusted. Yet Samuel Owens seemed different somehow, his compassion genuine, and his respect for her and the children evident in every interaction. With a sigh, she turned and went inside, closing the door on the vast Montana night. One day at a time, she reminded herself. For now they were safe, fed, and together more than she had dared hope for when they'd fled into last night's storm. Days stretched into a week, Then, too, as the Valentine siblings settled into a routine on Samuel's ranch. Each morning began before dawn with chores: animals to feed, eggs to collect, water to haul. After breakfast, they would separate for their daily tasks. Samuel and Penelope working the ranch while Emma helped with household duties, and Thomas, under careful supervision, learned to care for the smaller animals. Penelope found herself adapting quickly to ranch life. Though the work was different from what she'd known, it was straightforward and honest, each task having a clear purpose and visible results. She discovered an unexpected satisfaction in mending fences, tending the vegetable garden Samuel had neglected, and even learning to ride his gentler mare, Daisy. Mrs. Thornton had been true to her word, arriving with a trunk of clothes that had belonged to her daughter. "She's married a banker in Helena now," the older woman explained as Penelope marveled at the quality of the garments. "Has no use for sensible clothes anymore, just frippery and lace." The practical dresses, shawls, and even a sturdy pair of boots transformed Penelope's appearance and comfort. Emma, too, benefited from the generosity, though Thomas had to make do with some of Samuel's clothes cut down to size, a project that Penelope undertook in the evenings as they sat by the fire. These quiet evenings became something Penelope looked forward to throughout the day. After the children were asleep, she and Samuel would often sit in companionable silence, she with her mending and he with his ledgers or a book. Occasionally they would talk, sharing stories from their pasts, the happier memories, at least, or discussing plans for the ranch. Mrs. Thornton said the apple trees at the south end of your property used to produce good fruit, Penelope mentioned one evening. With a little attention, they might again. Samuel glanced up from his book. "You planning on becoming an orchardist, Miss Valentine?" She blushed slightly. "I was merely thinking practically. Apples store well for winter, and what you can't eat can be sold in town." "Makes good sense," he agreed. "Though I know nothing about fruit trees. My mother taught me. We had a small orchard back." She hesitated, still finding it difficult to call the Valentine homestead home after what had transpired there. "Then I'll defer to your expertise," Samuel said, saving her from completing the thought. "We'll look at those trees tomorrow." It was a small exchange, but typical of how their relationship had evolved, a partnership of sorts, based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Samuel valued her opinions and knowledge, never dismissing her suggestions because she was a woman, as her father had often done. The children, too, were flourishing in this new environment. Emma had taken to helping Mrs. Thornton with her preserving, learning new recipes and techniques that she proudly implemented in Samuel's kitchen. Thomas had appointed himself assistant ranch hand, following Samuel like a shadow whenever permitted, absorbing knowledge about animals and ranch operations with eager enthusiasm. At night, Penelope would often find Thomas asleep with one of Samuel's books of animal husbandry clutched to his chest, having struggled through the complex text until exhaustion claimed him. The sight never failed to move her, this evidence of her brother's determination and growing confidence. One afternoon, as Penelope worked in the garden that she had reclaimed from neglect, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun to see a rider coming up the long drive to the ranch house. Fear immediately clutched at her heart. Was it her father? Had he somehow found them? She dropped her gardening tools and hurried toward the house where Emma was baking bread. Samuel and Thomas were in the north pasture checking on a pregnant heifer. "Emma," she called as she entered. "Go find Samuel, quickly." Emma, sensing her sister's urgency, didn't question the order. She disappeared out the back door as Penelope peered cautiously through the front window, trying to identify the approaching rider. Relief flooded her when she recognized the uniform of Sheriff Dawson, a man she'd met briefly on one of their trips into town for supplies. Still, caution made her heart race as she stepped onto the porch to greet him. "Afternoon, Miss Valentine," Sheriff Dawson called as he dismounted. "Is Owens about? He's checking the livestock," Penelope replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I help you with something, Sheriff?" The lawman removed his hat, revealing graying hair beneath. "Actually, I came to speak with you if I might." Fear returned icy in her veins. "Of course. Would you care for some coffee? Emma just put on a fresh pot." "Much obliged." Inside, Penelope busied herself pouring coffee, using the familiar task to calm her nerves. Sheriff Dawson settled at the table, placing his hat beside him. "Miss Valentine," he began after taking a sip, "I received a visitor in town yesterday, Thaddeus Valentine." Penelope's hand trembled, nearly spilling the coffee. "I see. He claims his children have been kidnapped." The sheriff's eyes, kind but shrewd, studied her reaction. "Says Samuel Owens might be involved, given the bad blood between them over water rights some years back." "That's not true," Penelope said firmly, finding her voice. "Samuel had never met any of us before the night we arrived here." Sheriff Dawson nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected as much. Your father was not in a reliable state when he made these claims." "He was drunk," Penelope stated bluntly. "Yes, madam, he was." The sheriff set down his cup. "Miss Valentine, I've known your father many years, known his temper too. And I couldn't help but notice that wound healing on your temple." Unconsciously, Penelope's fingers rose to touch the scar that remained from her father's bullet. "Sheriff, my siblings and I left of our own accord. We came here seeking shelter from the storm and from my father's violence. Samuel has been nothing but kind, offering us work and safety until we can arrange passage to our aunt's home in Boulder." Sheriff Dawson considered her words, then nodded slowly. "That matches what Mrs. Thornton told me when I stopped by her place first. That woman doesn't miss much." Relief washed over Penelope. "Then you believe me." "I do. But you should know your father's making noise about coming out here himself. He's convinced Owens has turned his children against him." The door opened suddenly, and Samuel entered with Thomas and Emma behind him. His expression was thunderous as he assessed the situation, clearly having been briefed by the children. "Dawson," he acknowledged curtly. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff stood. "Just having a chat with Miss Valentine about her father's recent visit to town." Samuel moved to stand beside Penelope, a subtle but clear indication of his support. And I'll be telling Thaddeus Valentine that his children are here of their own free will, old enough to make their own decisions." Sheriff Dawson replaced his hat. "But I can't stop him from coming out here, Owens. Just wanted to give you fair warning." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Appreciated." The sheriff nodded to Penelope. "Madam." Then, with a tip of his hat to Emma, he took his leave. For a moment after his departure, no one spoke. Then Thomas's small voice broke the silence. "Is Papa coming here?" Penelope knelt before her brother, taking his hands in hers. "I don't know, Thomas, but if he does, Sheriff Dawson knows the truth now. He'll help us." Samuel's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. I promised you'd be safe here, and I mean to keep that promise." The certainty in his voice steadied her, as did the solid pressure of his hand. Penelope looked up at him, finding his blue eyes fierce with determination. "I believe you," she said softly. And remarkably, she did. That night, after the children were asleep, Penelope found Samuel on the porch again, this time cleaning his rifle by the light of a lantern. The sight sent a chill through her despite the warm evening. "You think it will come to that?" she asked, nodding toward the weapon. Samuel set the rifle aside. "I pray it doesn't. but I won't be caught unprepared if your father makes good on his threats." Penelope wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer night. "Perhaps we should leave sooner. There's a stage to Boulder next week. We've saved enough from my wages. Running now would look like guilt," Samuel interrupted gently. "Better to stand our ground. Sheriff Dawson's a good man. He'll keep an eye on your father." "I'm putting you in danger," Penelope whispered, the realization striking her with fresh force. "You've done nothing but help us, and in return I've brought trouble to your door." Samuel rose from his seat and moved to stand before her. In the lantern light, his expression was solemn but without regret. "Penelope," he said, using her given name for the first time, "trouble was no stranger to me before you arrived. I don't fear Thaddeus Valentine or any man who would raise his hand to his own children. But why risk yourself for us? We're nothing to you." Something shifted in Samuel's gaze, a softening that made Penelope's heart flutter strangely. "Is that what you think? That after these weeks, you and those children mean nothing to me?" Words failed her as she registered the implication of his question. Had he grown attached to them to her as she had to him? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Samuel," she began, uncertain what she meant to say. Before she could continue, the sound of distant hoofbeats broke the night's stillness. They both turned toward the sound, Samuel's posture immediately alert. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Wake the children and take them to the cellar. There's a door at the back that leads out to the creek if needed." "But now, Penelope," Samuel said, reaching for his rifle, "please." The urgency in his voice propelled her into action. She hurried inside, rousing Emma and Thomas from their sleep, and ushering them toward the cellar door hidden beneath a rug in the kitchen. The children, sensing her fear, asked no questions as they descended the narrow stairs into the cool darkness below. Penelope lit a small lantern stored there, illuminating the root cellar with its shelves of preserved foods and supplies. She positioned herself near the bottom of the stairs, listening intently for sounds from above. "Is it Papa?" Emma whispered, clutching Thomas's hand. "I don't know," Penelope admitted, "but Samuel will handle it." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited in tense silence. Finally, they heard the heavy tread of boots above, followed by the cellar door being lifted. "It's safe," Samuel called down. "Come on up." Penelope ascended first, prepared to shield her siblings if necessary. She emerged into the kitchen to find Samuel standing with Sheriff Dawson and another man she didn't recognize. "False alarm," the sheriff explained. "This is Deputy Collins. We were patrolling and thought we'd check in, given the circumstances." Relief made Penelope's knees weak. "Thank you. Your father's sleeping it off in my jail tonight," Sheriff Dawson continued. "Made quite a scene at the saloon, threatening all manner of violence. Thought it prudent to keep him contained until he sobers up." Samuel nodded his agreement. "Wise decision. Can't keep him locked up forever, though," the sheriff warned. "You might want to consider expediting those travel plans you mentioned, Miss Valentine." After the lawman departed with promises to return the following day, Penelope helped the children back to bed. Thomas was especially shaken, clinging to her when she tried to leave. "I don't want to go to Boulder," he confessed in a small voice. "I like it here." Samuel said I could help with the new calf when it comes. Penelope smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "We may not have a choice, Thomas, if Father keeps making threats." "Samuel won't let him hurt us," Thomas said with the absolute faith of childhood. "He promised." "Even Samuel can't protect us forever," Penelope said gently. "He has his ranch to think of, his future." "But what if we're part of his future?" Emma asked sleepily from her side of the bed. "He looks at you the way Pa used to look at Ma before she got sick." Penelope's cheeks warmed at her sister's perceptive observation. That's enough talk for tonight. Sleep now." When she returned to the main room, she found Samuel stoking the fire despite the mild night. His movements were agitated, lacking their usual economy. "The children are finally asleep," she informed him, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Samuel nodded without turning. "Good." "Samuel," she began, gathering her courage, "I've been thinking about what the sheriff said. Perhaps it would be best if we left sooner." "The stage on Monday. Is that what you want?" he interrupted, finally facing her. "To leave?" The raw emotion in his voice caught her off guard. I don't know, but I can't allow my father to bring violence to your home, not after everything you've done for us." Samuel crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of where she stood. "Penelope, this home has been little more than a place to sleep since I built it 5 years ago. These past weeks, with you and the children here." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. "For the first time, it feels like more than just walls and a roof." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want you to go." The admission seemed to cost him something, his voice rough with feeling. "Not to Boulder, not anywhere. I'm saying these weeks have shown me what my life should be filled with more than just cattle and ledgers and empty rooms." "Samuel," she whispered, overwhelmed by his words and the intensity behind them. "I know it's too soon," he continued hurriedly. "I know you've had no reason to trust men given what your father— I'm not asking for promises, Penelope. I'm just asking for time. Time to show you that not all men are like him, that there can be safety in staying, not just in running." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, not of sadness but of a complex emotion she couldn't name: relief, hope, fear, and something else that made her breath catch. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Everything is happening so fast." Samuel stepped back, giving her space. "You don't have to say anything tonight, just think about it, about staying, not out of necessity or fear, but because you might want to." She nodded, unable to form words around the tightness in her throat. Samuel seemed to understand, for he merely wished her good night and retreated to his makeshift bed by the fire, leaving her to return to the bedroom and her sleeping siblings. As she lay awake in the darkness, Penelope's mind whirled with possibilities. Could they really stay? Build a life here on this ranch with this man who had shown them nothing but kindness and respect? The idea was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Emma's words echoed in her mind. "He looks at you the way Pa used to look at Ma." And if she was honest with herself, she had begun to look at Samuel in a similar way, with admiration that had gradually deepened into something warmer. Something that made her heart race when their hands accidentally touched, or when she caught him watching her across the room. But was that enough to risk staying? To face her father's wrath and the judgment of a community that might view her as a woman of loose morals for living under the roof of an unmarried man, even with her siblings as chaperones? Morning brought no clarity, only the familiar routine of chores and meals that had become their life on the ranch. Samuel was quiet, giving her the space he'd promised to consider his words. The children, however, were more animated than usual, particularly when Sheriff Dawson arrived mid-morning with news. "Your father's being released," he informed them without preamble as they gathered on the porch. Sobered up, full of apologies and promises to behave. "I've warned him to stay away from here, but you can't enforce that without a court order," Samuel finished. The sheriff nodded grimly. "And that takes time and evidence, more than we have at present." Penelope felt Thomas press against her side, seeking reassurance. She placed her arm around his shoulders, drawing strength from the need to protect him. "What do you suggest, Sheriff?" "Truth be told, Miss Valentine, I'd feel better if you and the little ones weren't here when he comes calling. and he will come calling, make no mistake." "They could stay with Mrs. Thornton," Samuel suggested, "just until we see what Thaddeus intends." The sheriff considered this. That might work. Martha Thornton's no-nonsense reputation is well known. Even Thaddeus might think twice about causing trouble there. "I don't want to leave," Thomas protested, looking up at Penelope with pleading eyes. "I want to stay with Samuel." "It would only be temporary," Samuel assured him, crouching to the boy's level. "Just until we're certain it's safe. Mrs. Thornton has that barn cat with the new kittens she mentioned. You might like to help name them." This distraction worked its magic on Thomas, whose expression brightened slightly. "The orange one could be Copper," he mused. "An excellent name," Samuel agreed solemnly. Plans were made quickly. Penelope and the children would go to Mrs. Thornton's immediately, taking only what they needed for a few days. Sheriff Dawson would return to town to monitor Thaddeus Valentine's movements, while Samuel would remain at the ranch, ostensibly to work but primarily to confront Thaddeus if he appeared. As they prepared to leave, Penelope found herself lingering in the bedroom, touching the quilt she had grown accustomed to sleeping under, wondering if she would ever return to this room, this house. Samuel's proposal, for that's what it had been, in essence if not in form, hung in the air between them, unaddressed in the urgency of the moment. "Everything's ready," Samuel said from the doorway. "Wagons loaded." Penelope turned to face him, struck by how quickly he had come to represent safety and possibility in her mind. "Samuel, about last night, not now," he interrupted gently. "We'll have time for that conversation when this is settled, one way or another." She nodded, accepting the wisdom of his words even as her heart ached with things unsaid. As they moved toward the door, Samuel caught her hand, stopping her. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "know that these weeks have been the best of my life. You and those children brought something to this place I didn't know was missing." Impulsively, Penelope rose on tiptoes and pressed a brief, soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for everything, Samuel Owens." The surprise and pleasure that transformed his face was something she carried with her as they drove away from the ranch, Thomas and Emma waving goodbye from the back of the wagon, until Samuel's figure became a distant speck against the Montana landscape. Mrs. Thornton welcomed them warmly, having been briefed on the situation by Sheriff Dawson earlier. Her home was smaller than Samuel's but meticulously kept, filled with the evidence of a long and well-lived life: photographs, handmade quilts, and furniture polished by decades of use. "You'll stay as long as needed," the older woman assured Penelope as they settled the children in a small bedroom off the kitchen. "Thaddeus Valentine doesn't frighten me. Never has." Penelope was grateful for the woman's confidence, though worry for Samuel gnawed at her throughout the day. Would her father go to the ranch? What would happen if he did? As evening approached, these fears intensified. Mrs. Thornton, noting her distraction, sent her to gather eggs from the henhouse to keep those hands busy while your mind works itself out, as she put it. Penelope was returning with a basket of fresh eggs when she saw a rider approaching at a gallop. Her heart lurched with fear until she recognized Deputy Collins. She hurried to meet him, dread pooling in her stomach. "Miss Valentine," the deputy called as he dismounted. "Sheriff sent me to fetch you. There's been trouble at the Owens place." "Samuel?" she asked, barely able to form the name. "He's alive," Deputy Collins assured her quickly. "But there was a confrontation with your father. Both men are injured. Sheriff says to come quick and bring the children. He thinks it best you all clear out of the territory for a while." Mrs. Thornton appeared on the porch, having overheard. "I'll get the little ones ready," she said decisively. "You go on ahead with Deputy Collins, Penelope. Those children will need a familiar face when they arrive." Within minutes, Penelope was riding behind the deputy, clinging to his waist as they galloped toward Samuel's ranch. Her mind conjured terrible scenarios: Samuel bleeding, dying, her father's violence having claimed another victim because of her. When they arrived, the ranch yard was eerily quiet. Sheriff Dawson's horse was tethered outside, along with another she didn't recognize. Penelope slid from the deputy's horse before he had fully stopped, running toward the house. Inside, she found Samuel sitting at the table, Sheriff Dawson bandaging a wound on his forearm. Blood had soaked through his shirt, but he was conscious and alert, his eyes finding hers the moment she entered. "Penelope," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. "You're safe." "What happened?" she demanded, rushing to his side to examine his injury. "Where is my father?" "Doc Peterson's taken him to town," Sheriff Dawson answered. "Bullet in the shoulder. He'll live, though his pride's more wounded than his flesh." "Bullet?" Penelope repeated, looking between the two men. "Samuel, did you?" "He came here raging," Samuel explained, wincing as the sheriff tightened the bandage. "Demanding to know where you and the children were hidden. When I refused to tell him, he drew his gun." "Samuel defended himself," Sheriff Dawson interjected. "I arrived just as it happened." "Your father fired first," grazed Owens's arm. Samuel returned fire with better aim, though he clearly wasn't shooting to kill. Penelope sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "What happens now?" "Now," the sheriff said, securing the bandage, "Thaddeus Valentine faces charges of attempted murder. He'll spend time in prison, Miss Valentine. Considerable time." The news should have brought relief, but Penelope felt only a hollow emptiness. Despite everything, Thaddeus was still her father, the man who had once carried her on his shoulders and taught her to fish in Whitefish Creek. "I'm sorry," Samuel said softly, reading her expression. "I didn't want it to come to this." She shook her head. "No, I'm the one who's sorry. My family's troubles have cost you too much already." Before Samuel could respond, the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. Deputy Collins appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Thornton's here with the children." What followed was a flurry of activity and explanation. The children, initially frightened by the sight of Samuel's injury, were calmed by his reassurances, and the sheriff's matter-of-fact account of events edited for young ears, of course. Mrs. Thornton took charge of the kitchen, brewing coffee and preparing a light meal for everyone, her practical efficiency a balm in the chaos. It was late evening before the sheriff and deputy departed, promising to return the following day with news of Thaddeus Valentine's condition and the formal charges against him. Mrs. Thornton, despite Penelope's protests, also left for her own home, leaving the Valentine siblings alone with Samuel once more. The children, exhausted by the day's events, fell asleep quickly, curled together in the bed they had come to think of as their own. Penelope tucked them in, pressing kisses to their foreheads and whispering reassurances that tomorrow would be better. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Samuel on the porch, arm bandaged and supported by a sling fashioned from one of his shirts. He stared out at the night, his profile etched against the starlight. "You should be resting," she chided gently, joining him. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too much thinking to do," Penelope nodded, understanding completely. "Samuel, about what you said last night." He turned to face her, his expression guarded. "You don't need to answer that now. Today has been overwhelming." "No," she disagreed firmly. "Today has been clarifying." She took a deep breath, summoning courage. "I don't want to go to Boulder, neither do the children. We want to stay here with you." Hope flickered across Samuel's face, quickly tempered with caution. "Penelope, I don't want you to feel obligated. What happened with your father has nothing to do with my decision," she interrupted. "Or rather, it does, but not in the way you think." Today showed me that life is unpredictable, sometimes violent. Happiness, when found, should be grasped with both hands. Samuel stepped closer, his uninjured hand reaching for hers. And have you found happiness here? With me? Penelope twined her fingers with his, marveling at how natural it felt. I have. It crept up on me slowly in morning coffee shared before dawn, in your patience with Thomas's endless questions, in the respect you've shown me when so few men would. I love you, Samuel said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I think I have since that first morning when you insisted on helping with the fences despite having barely slept. Your strength, your devotion to those children, your kindness. I never stood a chance. Joy bloomed in Penelope's chest, as warm and bright as sunrise. I love you too, she whispered, the words new on her tongue but utterly true. Though I fought against it, fearing what trusting a man might mean. I'll spend a lifetime proving that trust well placed, Samuel promised, drawing her closer. If you'll let me. Her answer was to rise on tiptoes once more, but this time her kiss found his lips tentative at first. Then with growing confidence as his arm encircled her waist, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Samuel pressed his forehead to hers. Marry me, Penelope. Let's make this family we've been building official. Tears of happiness spilled down her cheeks. Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes. 3 weeks later, Penelope Valentine became Penelope Owens in a simple ceremony performed by Reverend James in the small church in town. Mrs. Thornton had helped her transform one of the dresses into a suitable wedding gown, adding lace from her own trousseau at the collar and cuffs. Emma served as her maid of honor, beaming with pride in a new blue dress, while Thomas stood solemnly beside Samuel as his best man, chest puffed out with importance. Sheriff Dawson attended, as did several of Samuel's neighbors who had come to know the Valentine siblings during their stay. Even Deputy Collins made an appearance, bringing news that Thaddeus Valentine had been transported to the territorial prison to await trial, his shoulder healing satisfactorily. The news brought a bittersweet pang to Penelope's heart, but it was quickly overshadowed by the joy of the day of Emma's delighted gasp when Samuel presented her with a small gold locket containing a tiny painting of their mother. Commissioned from a photograph Penelope had kept, of Thomas's face when Samuel officially named him assistant ranch manager, of the moment when she and Samuel spoke their vows beneath the simple wooden cross. I promise to keep you safe, Samuel whispered to her as they walked back down the aisle together. All of you, always. I know, Penelope replied, squeezing his hand. You already have. The reception was held at the ranch with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from tree branches. Mrs. Thornton and several other neighbor women had prepared a feast, and someone brought a fiddle, leading to dancing that continued well into the evening. As the celebration wound down and guests departed, Samuel and Penelope found themselves on the porch once more, watching as Emma taught Thomas a simple waltz in the yard, counting steps aloud as they moved in awkward circles. Happy? Samuel asked, his arm around her waist. Penelope leaned into his embrace, contentment filling her completely. Beyond words, he pressed a kiss to her temple, right over the scar that had once marked her escape. When you stumbled into my barn that night, I never imagined that we'd end up here. She finished, turning in his arms to face him. Neither did I, but I'm grateful every day for the storm that drove us to your door. Samuel smiled, that special smile he reserved only for her. As am I, Mrs. Owens, as am I. Later that night, after the children had been tucked into their beds now in a room of their own, as Samuel had moved his things into the main bedroom with Penelope husband and wife stood in their bedroom, suddenly shy with each other, despite the intimacy they had already shared in countless other ways. "I've never," Penelope admitted softly as Samuel took her hands in his. "I know," he assured her. "We have all the time in the world. Nothing happens tonight that you don't want." His consideration, his patience, brought tears to her eyes once more. "What did I do to deserve you, Samuel Owens?" "I ask myself the same question about you every day," he replied, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone to catch a tear. "Perhaps some blessings aren't about deserving, but simply about being in the right place at the right time, and having the courage to stay when it would be easier to run." Penelope rose on tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her love and trust into the gesture. Samuel responded in kind, his embrace gentle yet filled with promise. That night marked the beginning of their life together, not as a woman fleeing violence and a man offering sanctuary, but as equals, partners in whatever the future might hold. 5 years later, the apple orchard was in full bloom, white blossoms carpeting the ground beneath the trees like early snow. Penelope moved between the rows, basket on her arm, checking the progress of the blooms that would soon give way to fruit. In the distance, she could see Samuel and Thomas working with the new foal born just last week, their heads bent together in serious discussion. At 17, Thomas was nearly as tall as Samuel now, his boyish features maturing into those of a young man. His gift with animals had only grown stronger over the years, and there was talk of him perhaps studying veterinary medicine when he was older, a prospect that both excited and terrified Penelope, who couldn't imagine the ranch without her brother's presence. Emma, now a poised young woman of 21, had recently taken a position teaching at the town school, riding back and forth each day on the mare Samuel had given her for her 18th birthday. Her sharp mind had flourished under Mrs. Thornton's tutelage and Samuel's encouragement, defying the conventional expectations for a woman in the Montana Territory. A cry from the house drew Penelope's attention, and she smiled as she spotted her daughter, 3-year-old Sarah, toddling across the yard with Emma in pursuit. The little girl's dark curls, so like her father's, bounced with each step, her laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "Mama," Sarah called, spotting Penelope in the orchard. "Look, flowers." "Yes, darling," Penelope called back. "Beautiful flowers that will become apples by summer's end." As she watched her daughter's delight in this simple miracle of nature, Penelope's hand drifted to her abdomen, where another miracle was just beginning to make itself known. She hadn't told Samuel yet, wanting to be certain before sharing the news that their family would grow once more. The sound of hoofbeats announced Samuel's and Thomas's approach. They rode up together, Samuel on his stallion Thunder and Thomas on his own horse, a gelding named Copper in honor of Mrs. Thornton's long-departed barn cat. "The ladies of the orchard," Samuel greeted them, dismounting with the easy grace that still made Penelope's heart skip. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her love for this man who had saved them in more ways than one. "The men of the pasture," she returned with a smile. "How's our new foal?" "Strong as can be," Thomas answered proudly. "Samuel says she might be the fastest horse on the ranch one day." "With proper training," Samuel amended, tousling Sarah's curls as she wrapped herself around his leg. "And how's my Blossom today? I help Mama with flowers," Sarah announced, holding up hands stained with apple blossoms. "So I see," Samuel chuckled, swinging her up onto his shoulders. "A very important job." Penelope watched them together, this man who had once lived alone with his solitude and grief, now surrounded by family and love. The transformation in him had been as profound as her own, from a woman who feared men to one who trusted implicitly, who knew safety not as the absence of danger but as the presence of love. "Penny, for your thoughts," Samuel said, noting her contemplative expression. Penelope smiled, deciding that now was as good a time as any. I was just thinking that we might need to add another bedroom to the house before winter. It took a moment for her meaning to register, but when it did, Samuel's face transformed with wonder. "Truly?" he asked, his voice hushed. She nodded, joy bubbling up within her. "Truly." Samuel handed Sarah to Thomas, who understood without being told to give them a moment. As the boy led his niece toward Emma, chattering about the new foal, Samuel gathered Penelope in his arms. "Another child," he marveled, his hand covering hers over her still flat abdomen. "Another blessing I never dared hope for before you came into my life." "Before we found each other," Penelope corrected gently. "Two souls adrift until that stormy night." Samuel's kiss was tender, filled with the promise of their shared future. When they parted, he kept her close in the circle of his arms, both of them watching as Thomas lifted Sarah onto his shoulders, mimicking her father, while Emma pretended to chase them through the orchard. "They stay safe," Samuel murmured, echoing the promise he had made that first night. "All of you." Penelope rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady heartbeat that had become her anchor in the world. "We stay safe," she agreed. "We stay together. We stay home." And there, among the apple blossoms of the orchard they had nurtured together, Penelope Valentine Owens knew with absolute certainty that the frightened woman who had fled into a storm 5 years ago had found not just shelter, but a haven, not just safety, but love, not just escape, but return. She had found, at last, the place and the people with whom she truly belonged. Not in Boulder with an aunt she barely knew, not even in the home of her childhood before violence had tainted it, but here on a ranch in Montana, with a man who had opened his barn door to strangers and his heart to the possibility of family when both had seemed lost forever. They had built something precious together, something that would endure long after the scars of the past had faded into memory. Something as strong as the mountains that surrounded their land, as constant as the seasons that turned the apple blossoms to fruit year after year, as boundless as the Montana sky that stretched above them, infinite with promise. Home.